Despite popular online sentiment, Hearthstone is actually a good, well-designed game. At least if we're looking at the original cards. There are 3 ways to win a game of Hearthstone. The first is the most normal way, through minion combat. Play minions turn after turn, destroy your opponent's minions when profitable, and eventually take enough cracks at your opponent's face to win the game. The second way is control, a much less proactive game plan. For this, your goal is to cram more resources into your deck than your opponent's, alongside a healthy amount of removal cards, and stave off your opponent's attacks until they are all out of cards. The third way is to combo. More of an offshoot of control, these decks forego some of the resource generation to fit in a deadly combination of cards that, if given enough time, will guarantee victory. In classic Hearthstone, high-costed minions, especially large, legendary ones, were designed to be huge, game-ending creatures with earth-shattering effects. In the beginning, the 9 Hearthstone classes lived in harmony, each one with its own biggest boss minion, except Rogue, because its biggest minion was a 3-mana Edwin Van Cleef. But while Edwin doesn't match the mana cost of the other juggernauts, it matches the spirit of the others by being a top-end finisher representative of the class's identity. King Crush follows Hunter's game plan of direct damage. Antonidas enables Mage to have game-ending spell-slinging combos. Tyrion equips a giant weapon to close the game out. Gramage plays into all of Warrior's Enrage cards. Cenarius uses Druid's choose one keyword to either build a large board or buff your tokens. Alakir uses Shaman's Windfury keyword and Charge to close out games. And Jaraxxus was the ultimate example of exchanging health for power by setting your maximum health to 15, but getting a huge new hero power and weapon. But big minions weren't just class exclusive. In fact, the largest minions were neutrals. For stats, the dragon aspects Ysera and Malygos had 12 health, and Big Daddy Deathwing would set a long-running standard for the largest stats a minion could have, being a 10-mana 12/12. And these dragons represent the 3 ways of winning Hearthstone. Malygos' +5 spell damage was used in combo strategies such as with Rogue, Ysera was a great value generator for slow control decks, and Deathwing was the ultimate way to take over the board for minion combat. But while Deathwing was the peak for attack and health, the Giants were the high points for mana cost. While Sea Giant was only 10 mana, Mountain Giant and especially Molten Giant were north of the game's maximum mana total, requiring their baked-in discount effects to be allowed to be summoned. Mountain Giant was a defining card in so-called handlock strategies that utilized the fact that Warlock had by far the best hero power in the game to push elite stats onto the board and be shorn up defensively by taunt cards like Sunfury Protector. Molten Giant would also see use as Warlock to damage itself with its hero power and easily get that 20 cost down to something much more reasonable. Hearthstone's next couple expansions didn't really move the needle too much on huge minions. Dr. Boom was a 7-mana minion that was a 9/9 and summoned 3 minions, but if I was going to stop the video to mention every time a sort of large minion was introduced into the game, this video would be 8 hours, and I already started writing this video 4 months ago, and have somehow left the script in my Google Drive for this long. So, we're moving on to Whispers of the Old Gods. The expansion focused on enormous entities. Whispers of the Old God brought the boom when it came to ludicrously large minions. Again, as you can tell, the Costco guys were trendy when this was written. And most famous of all, Hearthstone's 10-mana mascot, the subject of countless video essays, Faceless Behemoth. Oh, also Yogg-Saron. Not so much an offensive weapon, but a neutral get-out-of-jail-free card that could bust up the game whenever it fell out of reach. Along with Yogg, this set also brought the other 3 old gods. These are especially interesting with N'Zoth and Yashara being big minions that support strategies focused on big minions. N'Zoth could resurrect great death rattles, and Yashara could pull huge minions straight from the deck. N'Zoth allowed for a number of new strategies to crop up now that there was this great top-end option available. For example, this Control Priest list from the 2016 Hearthstone World Championship featured excellent death rattles to revive with N'Zoth, like Sylvanas, Cairn Bloodhoof, and Shifting Shade? What? 2 Shifting Shade? This is what Shifting Shade does, by the way, because no way you knew that offhand. N'Zoth has had a long legacy for a card released so long ago, appearing as recently as a year ago in Reno Warlock Strategies and Wild. Outside of Yashara, it has probably the longest legacy of success, but Yashara will get a little bit more of a look later. The last old god was the most interesting, Cthulhu, handed out for free to all players who opened a Wotog pack, that's Whispers of the Old Gods. Cthulhu featured some incredible voice lines, and many acolytes devoted to it.
Your deck betrays you. Hope is an illusion. My dreaming ends. Your nightmare begins.
Classes like Rogue would have Blade of Cthulhu, and Warrior would have Ancient Shield Bearer to play into the fantasy of being a follower of the tentacled freak and preparing for its arrival. And theoretically, Cthulhu would bring about the end times for your opponent when playing by having huge stats and dealing oodles of damage. While all classes had access to the card and many had dedicated support cards, it was really only Warrior that managed to have any success with the card by putting it into control shells and using Warrior's excellent survival tools to hold out until the big stupid octopus was ready. While uncollectible, I do want to make mention of the Ancient One, whom you can summon using 2 copies of Blood of the Bancient One. It is a 30/30 textless minion, and the only way it can impact the game is if your opponent forgets to pay for their internet bill halfway through your match. Barnes. The reason I said I would get to Yashara later, Barnes gets into one of the less ethical uses of large minions, cheating them out unreasonably early. Barnes could be tossed into decks to pull out useful death rattles that you wouldn't mind being on a 1/1 body. Or you could just chuck a Ragnaros into your deck and start launching 8 damage fireballs at your opponent. And eventually, once enough resurrection cards came out, you could play Barnes with Yashara to pull more big minions and then resurrect the Yashara and so on. Ultrasaur and Tyrantus. In terms of large minions, we finally see a card eclipse the 12 health mark that had been established by the dragon aspects of Classic. I guess technically Jaraxxus was a 15 health minion, but it would never really be played as a minion by itself because it would transform your hero power. Anyway, Ultrasaur is just a common minion, but he has big ideas. Joining a long line of textless minions, it's probably better than Faceless Behemoth, if that means anything, I guess. I also want to give mention to Tyrantus as a newer version of the Deathwing stats, but with elusive as well. In addition, Tyrantus has recently been buffed to be a 14/14 and gaining taunt, becoming one of the largest minions in the game. Next, I want to get into Kobolds and Catacombs with the Darkness and Recruit. Another set that benefited Jumbo Dudes was Kobolds and Catacombs and its Recruit keyword. Allowing minions to be summoned from the deck, cards like Possessed Lackey provided ease of access to cards that were challenging to summon on their own. Voidlord, for instance, was a new hotness in terms of defensive minions, as it was itself a large taunt, but it more importantly broke into 3 incredibly annoying 3 health taunt minions. But if 18 health worth of taunt wasn't up to your standards, feast your eyes upon Hearthstone's largest minion ever. That's right, despite being nearly 7 years old, no card has eclipsed the Darkness for total stats yet. For 4 mana, you are getting a 20/20 minion. The catch? It is one of the slowest minions ever printed. Shuffling 3 candles into your deck, you need to draw all 3 in order to awaken it. Have one stuck on the bottom of your deck? Too bad. Hand too full and you burn one? Too bad. And then, much like the Bancient One, it's not like anything happens right away. Sure, you have a 20/20 on board, but if your opponent has the Light That Burns, Execute, Obliterate, or even Big Game Hunter, you are cooked. Sure, you could play something like Stowaway to try to facilitate the summoning, but again, no rush, no taunt, no keywords, and a huge target on its back for any industrious Vilespine Slayer. Despite only releasing a few years after the game's launch, it is surprising to see the Darkness remain as the high watermark for minion stats. But at 4 mana, it was certainly not the watermark for mana cost. That new echelon would be established in Rostigon's Rumble with Shirvala the Tiger. Shirvala the Tiger at 25 whole mana. Now of course, much like the Giants or any other 10 mana plus card, the card comes with a built-in discount system for getting it to a more reasonable price. The card was used in some Egg Paladin decks for its actual combat abilities, but much like me and most of my relationships, it was just used for its superficial qualities most of the time. As in, just the fact that it cost 25 mana was most important for launching at your opponent's face with Holy Wrath. I won't go into it too much, as I discussed it more in my Hearthstone History the Last Kaleidosaur video that no one watched, but for a long time in Hearthstone, Shirvala would stand as the high point of mana cost, and the Darkness would stay put at the summit of minion stats. While Rustgun's Rumble was a generally weak expansion, it does get to lay claim to two massive breakthroughs in giant minions, one being Shirvalah's huge cost, and the other being one of the most successful big boys in Mashog Enforcer. With 2 attack but 14 health alongside Taunt and Divine Shield, and only being 8 mana, this card is everything Ultrasaur wishes it could be. Finally, we have a card with a ludicrously large stat that was actually used. Appearing in so-called Wall Priest lists, this card had a number of positive traits going for it. For one, it was an enormous taunt minion for protecting your health. Secondly, it had 2 attack, which means it could be pulled out by a Master O card. And finally, the ludicrously large health total meant it could be comboed with Inner Fire and similar effects to enact serious damage on your opponents. The primes. Interestingly, instead of just throwing out increasingly large cards at each juncture when new big cards were needed, the Hearthstone designers thought of a different way to include huge minions. In Ashes of Outland, we have the prime cards, uncollectible cards that would be shuffled into your deck upon the death rattle of the associated legendary. For instance, we have talked about 10 mana 12/12s, but Zixor Prime would become an 8 mana 16/16 with Rush. Kargath Blade Fist would become an 8 mana 10/10 that rushes and gains a bunch of armor. And biggest of all, Mishafin would summon 2 9/9s for 10 mana. These cards were new top ends for the classes that allowed Timmies to have even more tantalizing options, but nothing quite pushed the boundaries of how big cards could get, like the Colossals. These cards look a little confusing at first with the +2s or +3s on them, but basically these cards are so big that they are actually spread out over multiple cards. They have huge artwork to go with it, and anytime they're summoned, they bring the rest of the pieces with them. So that means if you resurrect your Neptulon, you're getting all 3 pieces. Summoning Kolok from the deck, you're getting the shell along with it. We now get to see the limits of big cards can be pushed way past even the old gods. And all of the Colossals were relevant at some time, even Azumat and Kolok. Blackwater Behemoth and its lore were hugely frustrating tools for priests that could clear minions and gain big pots of health. Just compare it to Mashog Enforcer. It costs 1 less mana, but you're still getting 14 total health, plus it has 8 attack and lifesteal, and it even has a beast tag if you're into that. Glug the Gulper, it's okay, you can laugh, summons 6/6 of taunts in addition to being a 3/5, and it grows when those friendly minions die. The Leviathan was just a staple of Paladin decks by being 7 mana for 2 4-attack Divine Shield minions with Rush that also let you dredge and draw. Similar to Blackwater Behemoth, Xylag of the Abyss was also throwing down 14 health and firing ever more threatening lasers at the opponent. And, because I think people forget, each of Xylag's stocks can attack in addition to firing their laser. Gigafin comes in as a 14/14 that can permanently remove all your opponent's minions. And if it doesn't, it's still a pretty threatening attacker. Those were all pretty big, but the Throne of the Tides miniset took the concept of Colossals to dizzying new heights. The first of the 2 new Colossals didn't see a ton of play, but should be brought up for just how big it is as technically 1 minion. With Colossal +6 and 1/3 tentacles, the 8 mana Azumat is a ridiculous 12/23 who can wipe out your opponent's board if Azumat dies before the tentacles. But the other Colossal card is one that invokes fear in the hearts of wild players. Neptulon, the Tidehunter. Part of a pretty eclectic Tidehunter archetype, Neptulon is one of the main reasons I wanted to make this video. A retrain of Neptulon all the way back in Goblins vs. Gnomes, this card is no longer just for Shaman, and no longer has a horrendous effect. Instead, this 7/7 brings out 2 4/2 hands that are immune while attacking. So altogether, it is a 15/11 with Rush, and Wind Fury, and immune while attacking. Now, while the odd text on Neptulon stating whenever Neptulon attacks, if you control any hands, they attack instead, does put a bit of a cap on Neptulon's effective attack damage, it pairs phenomenally well with any resurrection effects that might bring back a Neptulon while you already have other hands on board. Now for 10 mana in modern Hearthstone, you'd want a great effect like this, but the issues arise when you're not paying 10 mana for this card. So with Big Shaman with Old Lightning Bloom and Ancestor's Call, games could be blowouts very early on if your opponent summons this Titan early. Well, it's not actually a Titan, that would be the Titans. One of the strangest evolutions in the lineage of huge minions, Titans and the Titan keyword allowed for activated abilities in exchange for the ability to attack. In some ways, these were a new rendition on Rosagon Rumble's Spirit cards of singular minions that would be on the board and grant you some positive effect. And these to me aren't exactly big minions. They have giant effects, sure, Yogg-Saron and Eonar come to mind, but they're not the piles of stats of the previous cards covered. For big positive stats, we can see Fanodum, the Lord of Opera. After 5 years of Shirvala as the sole summit of mana cost, the Festival of Legends miniset brings about Fanodum, the Lord of Opera, at 30 whole mana. In addition, its stats are huge at 15/15 alongside great keywords of Taunt and Lifesteal. While not exploding onto the scene, Fanodum got some elite supporting actors to help its cause. You see, well, at first it clearly paired well with cards like Forge of Wills and Loken, Jailer of Yogg-Saron. The only cards that really helped burn through your deck quick enough were Fracking and maybe Waste Remover, but with the release of Whizbang's Workshop, we got Wheel of Death, which would immediately blow up your whole deck, set Fanodum to 0, and put your opponent on a clock. Paired with the aforementioned Forge of Wills, your opponent was either going to die to the wheel or 2 15/15 swinging face. For a perspective on how little I've been locked in, the Season's Expanse was just revealed when I was first writing this video. And now, there's like a StarCraft expansion coming out, and it's filled with words I don't know how to pronounce. Terran? Tehran? Tehran? But obviously, eclipsing every other card on this list, the Season's Expanse is a profligate 100 mana card with 15 attack and 15 defense points that gets cheaper for every card drawn, played, or destroyed. Oh, and by the way, it also blows up the whole field. Getting quickly banned from Wild for being way too strong with Holy Wrath because, it does 100 damage. It also led to Order in the Court being reverted to its original effect of reordering your deck by cost and drawing a card, so it could not be paired with George Holy Wrath Bush. Meanwhile, in Standard is the most played card at Legend. Thanks, by the way, for HS Replay for giving me a free premium subscription. And is featured in lists like Rainbow Death Knight for when Threads of Despair isn't cutting it, Ramp Druid because Druids need more huge blowout cards, and it can even be cheapened quickly in Cycle Rogue strategies. And in terms of competitive success in Hearthstone esports, we can see it... Oh. Well. Hashtag happy 10 years of Hearthstone, everyone. Thanks for watching, everyone. In a quick update as to where I've been, I got a new job in the spring, got let go from that job, and then all of a sudden, 4 months passed? I don't really understand how that happened. I definitely have not been locked in. I apologize. Anyway, follow me on X, the Everything app. It's all happening on X. Or Twitter. Follow me on TikTok, even though, I don't know, I guess TikTok's going to be banned or whatever. Subscribe to the YouTube. Join the Chun Discord. And yeah, that's about it.